All right. Hi, everyone. Yay! It's the last session of the day at MidCamp. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Everyone in the back, too? Thumbs up? Perfect. Great. So I hope you've had a good day at MidCamp. I've been enjoying my time, too, here. But let's kind of dive in. So this is going to be a session about future-proofing your Drupal 7 site. So you've maybe heard some talks about Drupal 8, what's coming up. You saw the keynote this morning with Larry and Jeff. You're like, oh, those are really, really cool. But the reality is, if you have a site you want to build for someone, you're probably still going to be using Drupal 7 for at least a year or so, depending on how complex your site is. I'm kind of steeped in reality of site building. And that means we're stuck with Drupal 7, which is a great platform for a while. But there are lots of things that we can do to maybe help ease the transition. Let's see, a little bit about me. I'm a senior developer at Lullabot. My IRC handles and Twitter names, they're really hard to figure out. They're my real name. So you can find me everywhere easily. I have all my notifications turned off, so don't try and tweet me. And kind of my reputation in the Drupal community is the module guy. Or like, oh, did you need something? Dave Reed wrote a module for that. And I think at some point we calculated it. It was like 2% of all contrib modules I've touched or written. So it seems like a small percent, but it's a lot of modules. So I've kind of been well-versed in, making these requirements, backporting stuff from core versions. I've worked a bit with core. I was really involved in Drupal 7 core, not as much with Drupal 8 because I have a baby now, or a toddler, oh my god, and 2 cats who are really annoying. So yeah, there's the kid, that's Oliver, who I am just raising to be the perfect Nebraska kid who loves meat. And then there's the cats. Rodney on the left, Athena on the right. You usually don't get to see her, but Rodney actually ran to be a member of the Drupal Association board. But his application was rejected. So he's like the unofficial mascot of Drupal, I like to say. So let's start with some objectives for this session. What should you come away from after this? I want people starting new sites or adding features to sites to make informed choices. And those informed choices should be, what module should I be using? Am I going to be using the right modules? The biggest one is usually translation. Where do I get started with translation? What do I use? I've always been using the localization module for Drupal 6 and 7. So I kind of want to make sure we clear up some of those choices. And I really want to make sure that, I hate relearning, which is part of the reason why I'm so kind of bullish about Drupal 8. But it's developers are not the only ones who need to relearn. There's site builders and the people who actually do the day-to-day on your site. If Drupal changes a major version, they have to relearn how to do things too. They're used to that workflow. And so this is an inspiration of well, maybe that we can make some choices to minimize the impact for those people as well. So that switching to Drupal 8 could literally kind of be something they don't notice as much as they could. That would be the hope. It's not going to be the reality, but there's some things we can do. So that's kind of the 2 things I want to take a look at here. We're going to look at it from a site builder perspective. We're going to look at it from a little bit of a front-end and themer perspective, a little bit of a developer perspective as well. So kind of all aspects of doing a site build. So the first biggest area that I'd like to cover is user interface. So front-end modules, things that affect node forms, that kind of stuff. So we'll just dive in there. And I can't really cover anything under this section without kind of giving credit due to the Acquia Spark team, who is kind of the main driver in these user interface usability areas of Drupal 8. They did a really great job of pushing forward and experimenting with stuff that some things didn't work out quite as well. But overall, they're a main reason why we have a lot of these things. So, and it's kind of nice they have a whole distribution that you can try out for Drupal 7. I probably wouldn't recommend using the distribution for a production site, but it's nice to be able to see what's possible. So one of the biggest things that you will see on every page in Drupal 8 is it has a new toolbar called the navigation-friendly administration menu kind of thing, or navbar for short. And it's just really nice because it's responsive. So if you're in a desktop kind of orientation, you get your menus, you get menu shortcuts, that kind of stuff, or you're linked to your user account, and it can be extended and buttons added there. And if you shrink your menu down, it actually kind of nicely shrinks and is responsive to your device. So it's much more friendly than the core toolbar. I know that lots of people like to use the admin menu or administration menu module. So there's actually kind of another module that might be useful. Because navbar would be good for like the site day-to-day people, not administrators. There's a module called admin select. So you could default your admins to use admin menu. I'm going to try not to use the word admin again. And normal users could use navbar. You can set a default per role. And I really like using that. Sorry, say again?
What is that module called again?
The module is the admin select, or administration menu select. Admin_select is the project name. I've been working with that one too. So I really like using navbar. It does require some dependencies to have installed, so it's a little bit more complicated, but this is pretty much an exact backport of what Drupal 8 has. It's one nice thing that kind of is like a day-to-day thing taken care of. Another thing that has been backported to Drupal 7 is the inline editing feature in core. Kind of like Jeff Eaton, I'm a little bit like, I don't think you'd want this installed, but if you did have a demand for it, it is available, and it's called the edit module. And it can provide the inline editing for content. It integrates with panels, I believe, too. And they're keeping it pretty up to date, so that's pretty nice. But I kind of generally don't recommend that this kind of workflow be enabled on your site, but it's there if you want to use it. A huge thing is WYSIWYG in Drupal. Like, which WYSIWYG do I use? TinyMCE, CKEditor, Aloha? Anyone? Yeah. There was an interesting discussion when WYSIWYG was added to core. Originally, we were adding Aloha editor, and I don't know if anyone remembers that or knows about that. Like, they went bent over backwards for our community to like, yes, we'll be your editor. And then we kind of switched and decided on CKEditor, which was interesting. But I think it's actually a good result in the end. CKEditor is a much better fit for what we're trying to do with Drupal. They actually invented like this whole API for embedding stuff and being able to edit things without like editing too much inside. So like you can edit the image, but not the alternate and title text unless you're editing in a dialogue. So the CKEditor module is kind of what I recommend people have installed in Drupal 7. And it works, it's kind of a backport, but very well maintained. So I kind of recommend that. The Drupal 8 version is actually really nice because when you're setting up your text formats for what's allowed, you always have to manually add in the HTML tags that you wanted to add. Oh, I forgot to add image tag. I have to add IMG to the list of tags that are allowed. With Drupal 8, it's really kind of nice because if you have a WYSIWYG editor enabled for that format, you're like, oh, I want to drag the image button down to make it enabled, and it automatically puts that tag under the allowed tags for you, which is kind of cool. I don't believe it does this in Drupal 7. I would love that, but I don't think it's possible. So CKEditor is the way to go. For themes, there was only really one major change to Drupal 8 is that Bartik, the default theme in Drupal 7, was converted to be responsive. And this is available for Drupal 7 to use. I'm using this as actually a default theme on the current project I'm working on, where we're migrating 408 sites, and like 300 of them don't have a replacement theme in Drupal 7, so they're getting responsive Bartik. But I think it works pretty well out of the box. And you can see the nav bar there on a mobile kind of viewport has kind of shrunk down a bit, too. And it takes care of the menus for you as well, and it's just nice to have out of the box and gives a good impression. So that's really nice to use. Yeah. HTML5 is a big thing that we added into Drupal 8. So, there's support for lots of different areas of HTML5. There's input elements like email, URL, date fields, that kind of stuff, that if you, were to click into this field on a phone, it knows in an email field to provide you the @ symbol and the dot and make sure that they're prominent. If you had a URL field, it would provide like an http:// button for you. And it's kind of dependent on what device you're using, but it's very nice and contextual. Browsers for existence, if you have a number HTML field, will give you like an up and down arrow to move the number one value to your minimum and maximum. Date fields are supported in various browsers like Chrome, where you can pick a date, and that's really nice. So there's a couple of modules here in Drupal 7. The first one called Elements, which is kind of just an API for we're going to provide various types of form elements that can be used by other modules. It really doesn't do anything by itself. And that's where the HTML5 tools module comes in. That's the one where it actually takes email fields that are provided by the Elements module and says, okay, well, all the email fields on user accounts, let's change that from a text field to an email field. And it does a lot of that core replacement. It allows you to use HTML5 on field widgets too, which is nice. So that's a good combination there. There's more stuff with HTML5 with like audio and video tags. And there's also just the general like aside and new HTML tags for structuring. That's more kind of up to you to implement correctly. There's not really an automatic way, or depending on your theme. Like I know Omega and some Zen themes have HTML5 output too. Another great thing, Views is in core, which is awesome because we all use it on site builds. So it's just nice to have it there, ready and available the moment the day Drupal 8 comes out. So if you're not using Views right now, I would question your sanity nicely. But definitely make sure, take advantage of Views because it's available for you all the time. I know the more advanced use cases of Views can kind of get a little bit troubling with like, oh, it's making this huge complex query, and I want to do it myself, and I think that's totally fine too. But as long as you know what you're doing, like Views is great. And along with that, the default kind of administration listing pages in Drupal in Drupal 8 are now Views. So admin/content and admin/people. There's a file listing too, which is actually new. Those are all Views in Drupal 8 core. And there's a module called admin views that basically has these default views and swaps them out automatically for you when you enable the module. So it's kind of nice because that way you can alter them if you don't have to like recreate the content listing view yourself. This module does it for you, and then you can tweak it if you need to. So that's kind of nice. And there's also Views bulk operations made it into core. It's kind of a light version of Views bulk operations, but there is the module in Drupal 7, so you should be taking advantage of that too. Really helpful on your administration pages. Use it. So if you wanted to set up a view, if we're on this theme of views, of kind of a grid layout of content, there's a couple different modules out there. The one you probably should be using for Drupal 7 is called Views Responsive Grid. This is pretty much the solution that went into Drupal core and was added in. The one that went into Drupal 8 core uses not tables to do. Oh, wait. I think that's I think Views Responsive Grid doesn't use tables to do its layout, I believe. So it can be responsive. So if you shrunk it down, it could all appear in one column, that kind of thing. It doesn't use tables for that. So that's why we want to use this module compared to other grid-style views modules. And another kind of views-themed module is responsive tables. So if you have a table view, kind of a nice feature that's added into Drupal 8 is you can, if you're setting up this view and you have columns, you can actually tell like which columns are low priority and which columns are medium priority. And if you don't specify that, it's assumed high priority. And how that translates then is if you're changing your viewport to a smaller width or changing devices to smaller widths as you go, like the low priority columns will just hide themselves first. And then if you keep going smaller, the medium priority columns will hide next until you're only left with your high priority columns. So it's kind of nice because Drupal 8 Core uses these for the administration views by default. So if you're hitting the content listing on your phone, you're kind of getting just the important information that you need. And so there's a module to backport that functionality that I wrote for Drupal 7. So it's kind of an interesting one to use. Again, it's kind of a very niche kind of module, though. Breakpoints. So breakpoint is an API module to kind of define sets of points along that width of your viewport where stuff should happen. And this module is in Drupal 8 Core, and there's a module for this in Contrib for Drupal 7, aptly named breakpoints. So you can do stuff with layouts or responsive images based on these breakpoints. It's kind of more used as an API, though. So along with that, Drupal 8 ships with the picture module in Core, which allows you to define, like, if I have a big MacBook with the Retina display, I want to use this image style. Or if I have a mobile device, I want to use this image style when displaying this image. And that is available as the picture module in Drupal 7. I think there's kind of still a little bit of uncertainty about the actual solution being implemented, but I think it's getting a bit more well-defined now. So that one is a good one to use, too. It can be a little bit weird to configure, but I like using it. So I think probably my favorite Drupal 8 feature is actually the one that kind of people gloss over a bit, which is just tours. So they're a really handy way of providing inline contextual help that kind of more demonstrates, and it's a more visual kind of demonstration. So if you hit the views, if you're going to create a new view in Drupal 8, in your toolbar, that navigation bar, there's actually a button like Tour. And if you hit that, it'll kind of show you, hey, here's where you add fields. And here's where you configure how to filter or sort. And here's what you'd name the view, and that kind of thing. And it's a nice step-by-step kind of tour through that page. And it can do multiple pages. I know there's a good tour in Core for enabling multilingual setup, which is awesome to have. And this is always something I've wanted to do, or I've realized that I've wanted to do for every project I've worked on. For these complex functionality that I've made, rather than having to make a documentation for it, I could make a tour for it and just have that documentation more in line. So for Drupal 7, it's called the Joyride module, because that's the name of the library that this is based off of. So you could do that right now in Drupal 7. And I'm trying to do that for a lot more for my clients, just because it's really handy for that kind of stuff. I had one about a year ago that they had this complex data explorer, and I was able to create a tour or I wanted to create a tour for here's where you add the fields and that kind of stuff. So I really like this one. A very, very simple thing, but something that probably everyone's installed on Drupal 7 is how to filter your modules page so you can find the module that you're actually trying to use. This has made it into Drupal 8 Core. It's just a simple text field on top of the modules page. Everyone kind of uses the module filter module in Drupal 7, but there's actually a project called Instant Filter that much more replicates this behavior. And I actually kind of like it for its simplicity, because it also can be used on the permissions page, which is also very helpful. So I actually prefer using this one, even though I know that the module filter in Drupal 7 has more of a changes more of the UI of the modules page, which has its own benefit and drawbacks too. So, but I prefer to use Instant Filter. One of the interesting things in Drupal 7, if you had menus and menu links to administer, there's this weird edit menu, and if you go to that, you're only changing the title of the menu itself and not doing anything with the menu links. And it doesn't make sense to anyone that knows that's actually working on your site and creating menu links. you have to go click to list links and then go and add more links. Why can't you just have edit menu be if I wanted to rename the menu or do menu links? And there's a module for that. It's called Simplified Menu Administration. And it kind of just rewrites the way that works and just provides you one link to edit the menu and edit the links on that menu all on one page. And I kind of just always have this one installed by default. It's one less thing to have to explain. My most recent module that I backported is the Escape Admin module. So it was kind of mentioned in the keynote this morning that overlay exists to kind of help separate, your site from the administration side of things. That was the intent of overlay. It didn't do a very good job in the real world, however. So in Drupal 8, we basically ripped out the overlay module and changed it, as Larry and Jeff said, that we just put a link on the toolbar. And it's actually a little bit more complex than that. I'll correct them on that. It's actually a little bit of JavaScript to do this and uses local storage. So if I was on my home page and then I clicked an add content link, which takes me to administration page, I then actually see this back to site, and it will take me back to the page I was on before. And it remembers the page you were on before per tab in your browser. So if you had a different tab where you were on some kind of view on your site and you went to go edit that view, your back to site would go then back to your view that you were on before. And if you're just on the front end of your site, you don't actually see that back to site. It's just, this starts with dashboard. And this is the core toolbar module, I understand in the screenshot, but it actually integrates with the navbar module as well. Yes, a question in the back.
When did you save the view? Where do you go?
Sorry, say again?
When you save the view, where do you go? Is there still a redirect that returns you back to the front of the site where you see the view where you save the admin section? You go back to the view's admin page, or do you go back to the page on the site that you create?
So
if you don't click the link, you just save the view.
Got it. To clarify, if you were browsing the display of a view on the front end of your site and you hit edit view, it would take you to administration page to edit that view, and you would then get the back to site, which would then take you back to the front end of that view that you were on.
But when you save the view,
Destination is
does
when you save the view.
that link, it keeps you here on the view, or does it take you back to the
Destination is still in the URL.
I believe it does not set a... if you're actually using the contextual link to edit the view, it adds a destination to go back to where you were.
Right.
So that should work out of the box. And that's how it works in Drupal 7 too, if you're using the contextual links. Along with WYSIWYG, there's an interesting module that was added, or interesting feature added to Drupal 8 core for image captioning and image alignment. So if you embedded something in your WYSIWYG in Drupal 8, when you popped up the form, you get an option for, do you want to align this image, left, center, right, or none, and a checkbox for caption. And if you check that caption, it basically goes back to your WYSIWYG, and you get a place to type in a caption for your content. And it's really kind of nice, and this will make the Jeff Eatons of the world very happy, because it actually saves that caption right in the HTML tag of your image, which is really a good way to do that as data attributes. There is a caption filter module for Drupal 7, but it uses a little bit of a weirder token kind of syntax that wraps around the image tag. I'm working with that module maintainer to actually backport this functionality, which would be really nice because you don't have to mess with your body fields when you migrate. You could just be working out of the box, which would be nice. So, the more you can kind of do this with your formatted text fields, this kind of stuff, will also help you with Drupal 8. In Drupal 8, we added the ability to add custom blocks and custom block types, which is what everyone's wanted to do at some point. So you can create a text block type, which is just one text field. Or you could create a list of nodes block type as a kind of a lightweight node queue or something. So you can create different types with fields and then actually add blocks that get reused. And probably the best way to replicate this functionality in Drupal 7 is with the bean module. And this is actually from Drupal 7 screenshots for that. So it does a little bit more than that, but I think it'll be the best path forward for there. I know there's like other solutions like boxes, but I prefer bean because it's more like the Drupal 8 style. All right, so kind of the next section for Site Builder is field types. Everyone went like gangbusters in Drupal 8, adding all these different field types to core, which is really great because it saves you time for having to install and pick out modules. So like there's entity, we'll cover them here. But there's a lot more options now in Drupal 8. So let's go over those. Entity reference is now in core, so you should be using this instead of the node or user reference modules if possible. So use entity reference, it's really great. Yes, a question?
Term reference, is that still hard, or is that moving into?
So the question is what's going on with term references. In Drupal 8, there's still a different term reference field. I'm not 100% sure if it uses entity reference kind of underneath the hood. The desire is to only have one, but it's kind of a little bit confusing because people are used to term reference fields. So I'm not 100% sure what that resolution is going to be for core. But for right now, there's two separate ones. So, and entity reference, yeah, it's a great module. I use it all the time. If you want to add a field for telephone numbers, typically what people have used is the phone module. But to actually match what's provided by Drupal 8, it's a much more simpler version that I backported called telephone. It's pretty much just a text field that's a HTML5 phone field. And there's really not validation to it because it's way too complex to handle all the different types of phone validation. But it leaves the option to alter invalidation if you wanted to. And then just some simple formatters for displaying it as a link, as a telephone number link, or just plain text. So I kind of like it just for the lightweight version of that. And if I needed something more, I would write a custom formatter for it. So that's telephone module. For the email fields, it's kind of the same way in Drupal 8 core. It's very lightweight. It's just a simple text field with an email HTML5 type. No validation aside from the built-in validation of an email address, and very simple formatters. There is the email module in Drupal 7. That's really the closest thing and the best thing for that until I backport what Drupal has, maybe, but probably not. So I would use email. Since this module in Drupal 7 provides some more advanced stuff like a contact form link, that's not really available in Drupal 8. So just kind of be aware of that. I'm sure someone will port that formatter. URL fields it was kind of one that I took on. And again, in Drupal core, it's kind of simple. It's just a URL and a title. And I think they might be changing it in Drupal core to be able to reference internal or external links. But I kind of got tired of how I found the link module to be very complex and very heavy-weighted. So when I was working on this issue for Drupal core, I wrote this module called the URL module. And it's a very lightweight, just stores a title and a URL. The title's optional. It really doesn't do too much more than that. And so I like using that where possible because it I've encountered a lot of errors using the link module, unfortunately. So you can use that one too if you wanted to. There's date fields in core. Yay, we can probably use date fields. And really, the date module is where you want to look. There's nothing better for that. Things have simplified a lot, of course, in Drupal 8. They actually use HTML5 for the date fields. And that's something I might actually be backporting soon. We'll see about that. Because I kind of like the way that works. But date module is great for now. So the next section is kind of a little bit more developer-oriented. It won't get too detailed at all. But as a module developer, I just wanted to share some things that I'm doing personally with my modules that can help kind of ease the transition a bit. But I could probably go way further than what I'm doing, but I don't like to. Well, let's see what I'm doing here. So typically, when your module provides an API, let's see if I can, yeah. When your module provides an API, usually you do a hook info or some kind of hook where something returns an array of data. Like you specify the label, the callback that should be called. If there's a form, there's a form callback, that kind of stuff. That's typically how Drupal 7 core APIs work, and a lot of modules work as well. Or there's CTools plugins, where you have to define your hook CTools API, and then put it in the right folder, and have a class that has a separate file, and then a class that's named the same thing. And I find this very not friendly as a developer, unfortunately. And Earl Miles, the creator of CTools, is one of my friends, so I'm okay saying that. I just don't like to use it. So what I've done in Drupal 7, and actually a very good example of this is the media module, is kind of make something work like Drupal 8 plugins, but simpler. So what I do is I actually define an interface for my plugin type. So with the media module, we have this media browser with different tabs. Like there's an upload tab, there's a library tab, if there's a paste in a URL to a web link tab. And those are all plugins. So they all kind of are defined by this common interface where it has settings and display what should be output in the tab. So we have an interface for that. And we also provide a base class that implements that interface, not extends. So it provides just some common functionality that is pretty useful for all the plugins, that if they needed to override it, they could, but we're just kind of defining it as an abstract class. And we say manually that, in this example, they would have to make the process method themselves. We can't define that for you. So the media browser, we defined it as an abstract function that says, well, you have to define the view tab output yourself. We're not going to do that for you. And it'll cause an error if you don't define that method. So that's the interface and the base abstract plugin. And then what I do is, you may have, if you were in the Drupal 8 module writing session a little bit ago, you might have saw annotations and code that describes the plugin class. I don't actually like to do that. I like to use info hooks still. And at the expense of being stoned to death over saying that, if Larry is in the room, he would probably do that to me. I just like to use info, but I like to keep it simple, which is basically the label of the plugin, and, my example implementation, and then just pass me in a class name. And that's it. And so my module that runs this API, the media browser, goes through, it can cache this info and says, okay, if I've got the example tab, I'm going to create an instance of this class and run the process method. And it's a little bit more lightweight than having to scan files like the CTools stuff. So in my example here, I've defined that I have a plugin file in my info hook, and then just a very simple extends that plugin base and implements the process method. So that's kind of how I write plugins in Drupal 7. And this will translate really well to Drupal 8 plugins. You'll just need to add namespaces, but this concept of an interface, a base plugin that's abstract, and then implementations that extend that abstract base plugin is exactly what Drupal 8's doing. So I really encourage people to use that. Just you would convert the info hook to the code documented above the plugin method. So very little to transition for that. All right, there's some other stuff here too. So in Drupal 8, we finally added a UI for exposing view modes. or as Drupal 8 calls them, display modes. Has everyone used a view mode before or knows what a view mode is? Okay, a good amount. So basically a view mode, just to cover it, is like just a way of saying, given a node or a user account, I want to display it in the full page mode or the teaser view mode. And it's just a way of collecting how the fields should be displayed into a predefined format. So teaser, full, RSS is a view mode. And in Drupal 8, you can create your own custom display modes, both for the display of an object and also for the form of an object, which is actually really interesting. So you can actually customize the form and how it's displayed. But you can't really do that out of the box in Drupal 7. But I do have this module called the Entity View Mode module that lets you make custom view modes. So if you wanted to make a promo view mode for your node content type, you can do that. And it's really nice because if you use view modes, it's really reusable. You can use view modes in views. It's really easy to, like, in a code level to say, render me this node using the promo view mode, and you don't have to do any logic to handle that. So I really do encourage use of view modes a lot, and being able to create custom ones is really helpful too. Because we all can't be restricted just to the built-in ones provided by core. We like to add more. So that's how we can do it. Configuration management in Drupal 8 was a huge thing. Very successful initiative. The whole storing information in YAML files, deployable, all that kind of stuff is great. Unfortunately, this is like one of the points in Drupal 7 that there's no real good equivalent. There's features module, yes, but there's a lot of problems with that. Everyone probably knows that you've not had a fun time with features at one point or another. And there is this configuration module in Drupal 7. It's kind of an experimental thing, but it is kind of in progress. You might want to try this out. It could be warrant a look. But because configuration is such an internal, everything needs to work with it in Drupal core, it's really hard to replicate this kind of functionality from a module in Drupal 7. Yes, a question?
Configuration, it's actually more of a statement. Configuration works really well with features because then you can set your feature dependency on a configuration that's saved. And you're pulling config out of features.
Now we're just going several levels deep, configuration features that require configuration. So, okay. It's something to maybe check out, but that could help export stuff, but it's really hard to do from Drupal 7 core. You may have heard some sessions today about the migrate module. There's the great news that was, I think you're on the last DrupalCon, that we're going to be adding migrate module to core rather than doing updates from 6 to 7 and 7 to 8. Where you run update.php, we're going to support migrations instead, where we would support all the stuff provided by core, and then it's up to individual modules to write their own support for migrations between 6 and 7 and 7 and 8, or 6 to 8. So getting used to migrate module now, writing migrations, writing handlers, that kind of stuff, as a developer is really, really useful right now. So if you have a project where you're going from one system to another, or you may be considering a Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 update, I would highly recommend doing a migration instead. I mentioned that project earlier where we have 408 sites that we're converting from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. We're doing a migration for those instead of an update hook, just because it was going to take way more time to do the update.php testing and all that kind of stuff. So we're doing a migration. For web services, that's another big improvement in Drupal core. Larry Garfield has personally been responsible for a lot of that improvement in Drupal. So you can submit nodes and view nodes without actually having to hit a browser, which is really great. And typically what people have used is the services module for that kind of interaction with your site, or an API kind of level. But actually we don't recommend it anymore, also because it's kind of insecure too. As a member of the security team, it keeps kind of popping up as something we can't fix. So there's actually the REST-WS, RESTful Web Services module, that's much more like the Drupal 8 style, a bit more maintained as well. So if you have that need for your site, I would definitely check that out instead. Translation, that's the fun one. Typically people have used the localization module. There's the modules provided in Drupal 7 core, like the translation module. Don't use those. We don't want to use those. Because we have this set of modules, Entity Translation, which is really nice because Drupal 7 core, with its translation module, it creates like clones of content in each different language. And then you have to make sure you're filtering by like which node is English, which node is French. And you can't easily well, but if I'm displaying the site in French and this node doesn't have a translation, I need to view the English one. It gets way more complex having these clones of nodes in each language. And that's where the entity translation module comes in. It's really helpful because you have one node, but you translate the fields on that node instead into those different languages. And for stuff like node titles, there's the title module, which will basically swap out the node title with a field, which you then can translate. And that works for like taxonomy terms, users as well, I believe, any kind of entity type that you have. So that's kind of the two modules I always start with translating content in Drupal 7. And the good news is that we basically have this approach in Drupal 8 as well. So it'll be low barrier for doing that as well. Kind of a developer thing. There's the whole PSR 0 and PSR 4, which is dictating like where code lives. Drupal 7 is very freeform. You just have to define where your classes and loadable stuff are defined in your info file. But in Drupal 8, we're using PSR 0 and possibly switching to PSR 4. So it's like /lib/ namespace Drupal / module name / type of thing. Like it's very, criticism is that it gets very long-winded and lots of directories, which is why we might be switching to PSR 4. But I don't really want to cover that too much because I just want to mention that there's more libraries out there outside of the Drupal community that are using these standards, PSR 4 and PSR 0, that you may want to use on your Drupal 7 site. And to make the best use of them, you have to have something that can load those libraries. And typically the solution I use is the X-Autoload module. I'm actually using this on a current project. There's this neat little ISBN library on GitHub that I found. But it uses PSR 0, so I had to use X-Autoload, and it's just a one-line call to register the namespace of that library to my module to make it available. So if you need to use libraries, that's really helpful. And there's lots of other things too. Like Drupal core is using Composer now, which is a PHP standard of defining versions and requirements and dependencies. We're still not 100% sure how Drupal 7 can use it or how modules in Drupal 8 will use Composer. It's kind of up in the air right now. But there's this nice module called Composer Manager in Drupal 7 that if you have a module that has a Composer file that needs to download its libraries and that kind of stuff, it's really helpful to use that in the UI for managing that. PHP unit, you may have heard about Simple Test or testing this day. Drupal 8 makes a lot more use of actual unit testing using PHP unit. So as a developer, it's something I would start playing with now. You can write PHP unit tests for your custom code. You just can't really run them from the UI in Drupal. You just have to run them manually. But it's possible to do this. There's lots of different underlying technologies like Symfony which you maybe don't need to know as much about because it's more of an internal thing. But like for JavaScript libraries, there's backbone and underscore in Drupal core. So if you wanted to make use of those, I'd say that's encouraged since they'll be available in Drupal 7 out of the box. And those are actually required by the navigation menu toolbar. There's the Guzzle library, which is really, really helpful for like HTTP requests or fetching data, that kind of stuff. There is the Drupal HTTP request method that does a pretty good job out of the box in core, but Guzzle is really good for all the advanced stuff too. And another thing that Drupal 8 core is using a lot more is local storage, HTML5 local storage, rather than using like cookies to store data. I mean, the example being that like back to site button, that's using local storage, so it's using a per tab storage of where you were before to give you that link. Yes, a question?
So Backbone moves really quickly as a project. Which version is going to be tracked?
That's a good question. I don't know.
So we're going to have like a Backbone update module as well, just like jQuery?
I think that it's kind of an active discussion about how to upgrade like to new versions in Drupal core. That could make that possible without the need of like a jQuery update or a Backbone update module. I think the solution has kind of been defined as like we're going to change our numbering and version schema for Drupal core. So there will be a Drupal 8.0.0, which will kind of ship with all that stuff and won't change. And once we hit 8.1.0, that as like a major update, we'll be allowed to update versions as well. So like your module can depend on Drupal 8.0 or Drupal 8.1, depending on what you need. Maybe that answers your question a bit, but we'll see. Yes?
So Guzzle replacing the Drupal HTTP call. So OpenID now using Guzzle?
OpenID is actually removed from core. So I was actually going to cover that very soon here. So yeah, I had my whole like good segue. So there's actually this page of all the modules that have been removed from Drupal core. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to stop using them, but it's like an indication that they're kind of on their deathbed. So like OpenAPI or OpenID is one of those that kind of no one really wants to support anymore in the core community. It may probably still live on as a module for Drupal 8, which would probably use Guzzle then, since it was available. But it's kind of not as supported out of the box. Overlay, of course, we talked about removed. The PHP filter module is now out of the box, not included with Drupal core. You literally have to download a module to use it. And we're debating actually making it a dependency of using bad judgment module for that. I think that's a good win. So yeah, you can hit that list to see blog modules removed. So if you want to do blogs, you can just make a content type for that with views. Dashboard module is not going to be used anymore. And the other one is anyone using trigger module at all ever? Trigger? No? Good. Typically, people use rules for like the action and event kind of stuff. There's rules is not in core, but it will be a module in Drupal 8, so in Contrib. That's pretty much all I had. Any other questions for this? Or? Yes?
You mentioned a preference for CK Editor module, I gather that's over the WYSIWYG module using the CK Editor library. Would anything terrible happen to a Drupal 7 site if you switch from the WYSIWYG module to the CK Editor module?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. So I mentioned CK Editor module, and I totally ignored the WYSIWYG module. And that's for a point. Like I actually just recommend using the CK Editor module. For sites that are looking to switch from WYSIWYG plus CK Editor to just the CK Editor module, would there be any problems with that? I don't think so out of the box, but I don't think that should be really any too many issues. Like the WYSIWYG module doesn't really add its own content, so you should be okay with that. You just may have to enable configuration again. That's going to be the hardest part. Yes?
You mentioned entity view modes. How is that different from Display Suite?
Good question. How is Entity View Modes different from Display Suite? Display Suite has a lot of stuff compared to it, like so much functionality, which is a little bit overwhelming. And I just wanted a module to make view modes, so that's why that module exists. And it's actually what was the inspiration to have that feature added into Drupal 8 core as well. So it's just like, if you don't need all like the configuration of layouts of nodes and all that kind of stuff, like I just prefer to use that module instead. Like, but if you want to use like the layout stuff and be able to advance configure fields and all the other functionality that Display Suite offers, I would use that and the view mode stuff there. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the party tonight and have a good day.